Okay, let's do a practice. Screen share.
Hello?
Hello?
Where am I?
I don't know. I just see admin. Is that you?
I don't think so. Can you see me now?
No.
I see me.
I see you, Lily.
Can you see that? Can you see the screen share?
Nope.
It's a white screen.
Oh, yes. I can see white.
Hold on.
And I can see you, Mark.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Kim. Hi, Lily.
Hello. Oh, nice backdrop.
Wow, that was for my Zoom meeting yesterday. Hold on, I'm trying to change it.
Trying to practice with the sharing of the screen.
Down. There, better.
Because it's showing up here.
Oh, I lost all of you now.
You just have to go to the top right corner and you can pick how you view things. Mark, what format is that in?
It's a Google Doc.
Oh, she didn't send it to you as a PowerPoint or a PDF maybe?
Mm-mm. So let me see if I can save it.
Deirdre just came out of your head. That's funny.
I do like that.
Oh, I had her muted. She did a whole routine. It was,
You have me muted?
yeah.
You missed
Sorry.
my comment, Tracy?
They missed your comedy.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just testing it. I'm going to run through each one before we let anybody else in so you can see it.
Okay.
You just let me know when you're ready to proceed, and I'll also moderate the chat. Okay. Everybody see everything okay?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's great.
Ooh, that's a great photo.
Just so you know, Mark, we're seeing it the way you're seeing it. Like I see your tabs on your browser.
Okay.
So I think you might want to do presentation view or something like that when it's the time.
Okay.
Which I'll be honest, I don't know how to do.
Well, the good news is that none of my tabs appear to be pornographic at the moment.
Well, there's that button that says present right next to the share button. Is that it?
Yeah, try that.
No, because
I don't know Google
I
Docs.
had to, but when I put it in presenter mode, it like, then
There you go. Is that it?
I think it's taking a second, maybe.
I see it. It went full screen.
black on this end.
Yeah, it's black on my end too.
Okay.
It's weird.
That's not going to work. I don't care if people can see. I'll just close my tabs. How about that?
I had a lot of issues like this when I did my webinar.
Yeah, it's okay.
like couldn't see the presenter view and the people and the controls at the same time.
But we have a few people already in.
Yeah.
Okay, that's-
So let me just do those.
solving those.
There's
Got
Christina
something.
Miller.
Yeah, we have the waiting room function so that we can manage the process. So we're expecting a very nice group. So I'm just managing it as they come in so that we know that they have a name, you know, associated with them. So I'm gonna re-share it, just one more practice, okay? So I mean, because I guess you can see the upcoming slides.
Yeah.
You can see like the regular view. It's not presenter view.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at, because I have a view only mode.
Yeah, to get in here.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
It's the same issue I had.
Yeah.
You-
Well,
Well, what if you just download it and save it as a PowerPoint? Would that work? Do you want me to do that?
if you like. I sent it to Morgan and asked her to do that, but I haven't heard back from her yet. Thank you to all who are listening in as we're doing a little technical prep. We will be with you shortly.
Lily, thank God you had pants on when you stood up right now. Have you seen all those videos going around?
I have. I made sure to get out of my pajamas.
You're welcome to wear pajamas tomorrow, by the way, for the breakfast.
Really?
Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Hey, Ephraim.
Hi, Efren.
Absolutely, you're welcome to.
You know, okay.
Daytime pajamas, preferably. How's everybody doing with their PPP applications?
Hmm.
Haven't
Waiting.
started.
Waiting.
Waiting.
Waiting, a lot of waiting. We got notified by our bank yesterday that we are moving to close. So
Oh, wow.
Good news.
just waiting for a closing date. So we're very excited about that.
Hi, babe.
Boy, Eric, you're all dressed up.
Yeah, I love the background, Eric. That's a lot of Boy Scout right there.
I hosted our BNI meeting at 7 a.m. this morning, and Deirdre looked at me and said, "Why are you putting on a suit?" I said, "It's a work day."
Okay.
It's great.
Are you wearing pants? You're muted.
I'm wearing shoes and socks.
Oh, nice, nice, nice.
Well, that's good. I'm not wearing socks,
Hi, Carolina.
but I'm
Hey
wearing
there.
but I'm wearing pants. Hey, Carolina, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Wonderful.
I'm kind of zoomed
Wonderful.
out today. This is my 5th one today. I'm like kind of tired of Zoom today.
You're zoomed out.
Good grief. It's good though. I like it. It's easy
Why
to
do I have
operate.
a gray blotch in the middle of the screen?
'Cause I paused the sharing for a moment.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
I just spoke to a girlfriend of mine that works over at Holland and Knight. And just so many cases coming out of things that have never even come up before. There's no previous precedence for it. So it's gotta be crazy for you guys.
It's part of my presentation.
Not fun.
Everyone's doing okay.
We're okay.
Well, Deidre, I like your background.
It matches my shirt.
I'm gonna change mine.
I'm in the weeds today.
You don't want to see me. I'm wearing camo jogging pants and a white t-shirt.
That's what I'm wearing. Wanted to make this bigger. Remote control.
Henry, how is it that I changed the background?
Yeah, you have to just go there, screen
Video
save.
settings? Yeah.
Mhm.
How you doing, Deidre? How you doing?
Hi.
I love
There
the
you
background.
go.
I love
How
the
are you?
background. Hey, Efrain, how you doing?
How you doing, Carlos, man? How's
Good,
everything?
man. Just hanging in there, surviving. Being
I miss going down the hall and getting my cafecito.
I know. I'm being a superhero, just being at home, being a couch potato. A national superhero.
Well, yeah.
I went by the office yesterday because I needed to pick up some packages or whatever that were left there. Man, Coral Gables is a ghost town.
Everywhere.
Yeah, it's
Everywhere.
a ghost town. It's crazy. I mean, I was looking at pictures this morning of New York City, Paris, Tower Bridge. I mean, it looks like zombie man, Unbelievable. Crazy. Hey, Monique, how you doing? Oh yeah, she's muted. You're muted.
Hi, Monique.
Hey, Monique.
I'm Gisela Castro. Hi. All these people with no cameras on.
I didn't feel like I was camera ready, but I'm like, screw it.
Hey, Sarah.
The signs
How
of
are
the
you?
times.
Sarah's mute.
It's only us, okay? It's like
Yeah.
family.
I'm doing my nails.
Oh wow! Well, you called me right before
for the first time.
I was doing my hair right before.
Oh, nice.
Looks good.
Yeah, please
Yeah.
please let me know what you use so I don't use it.
It's a new style. Have you seen it? Yeah.
I see that you're putting it to the right, not to the left now.
Yeah.
So it's about 4:02. We have about 35 participants in, so we'll just wait a couple more minutes. If you would like to mute your microphone, we would appreciate that. If you're having any streaming issues, then sometimes turning off your video helps. Sometimes in residential communities, the internet is not as robust as it is in the commercial community, so if that helps. We have enabled the chat function, so for those of you that might have questions, we will be moderating those. We'll allow the presentation to obviously proceed, but we'll keep track of those questions, and if there's some clarity that we need, then we will certainly unmute you to clarify. So I know some of you are joining by phone. We welcome you as well. We will record the program.
Mark, I don't see the chat on my screen.
I have it minimized at the moment. Can you see it now?
Got it. I see it on the bottom.
Yeah, I
Got
moved it around just because there's some.
Thank you.
Just didn't want it to block anything. Very good. Thank you for making note of that. Appreciate that.
Mark, how many Zoom meetings have you done today?
Today, 4.
Wow.
But this is the first one with pans, so thank you for asking. We do a lot of Zooms, and then I participate in a number of them, but thank you for asking. I'm going to pause the share just for a moment. Don't worry about it if your screen's blank. I'm just going to double check the recording. So I just want to remind everybody that we are recording. Carlos Garrido is letting everybody know, if you're not looking at your chat, that he's happy to see very healthy faces. Oh, sorry, Carlos Bernia, sorry, from Heartland Payment. So thank you. So we're right at about 40 participants. So we'll just give it another minute or two, and then we will proceed. So. Yes, I am beyond addicted to my Purell. Very much so.
How do you still have any? I thought everyone was out.
No. This started as a full container, and I'll be honest with you, we may have borrowed it from Doctor's Hospital the night of the trustee reception. But we're down to the last part, but nobody's here. So it's just little old me. And in case you were wondering, the temperature in the office right now, 69 degrees. Fabulous.
Wow.
Yeah, if the ladies were here, they keep it at 75, and I'm always walking around like I'm having a stroke. So this has been my shining moment at the chamber the last 4 weeks. But I'm in charge of the temperature here. It's all I've been hoping for my entire professional career.
Got to aspire to something.
This is it at the moment. I hope you all are keeping up with everything that we're trying to do on social media, especially Instagram. You know, our average Instagram, just so you know, would have between 2,200 and 2,800 engagements, if you will, views, engagements, reactions. Last week was 21,000.
Wow.
So people are really using that to get information on what our restaurants are doing. You know, I know, Lily, we've had you on there, some of our other events, and then our stories, which is what most people kind of click through, are click through at 97%, which is really incredible. So people are really watching those all the way through for information. So if anybody's on and wants to share any of that with us, please do, because we're more than glad to feature that on our Instagram page at Gables Chamber. And much of that's being mirrored on Facebook as well, but we know that the Instagram is where a lot of our restaurants are because of the visual nature of Instagram. So they're doing a great job. We just saw or did a post for the folks at Clutch Burger. They fed the entire team of waste management for the city, because those folks are essential workers and they're continuing to work through all of this. So it was very nice. A lot of hamburgers. So we're right at about 4:10. We're about 40 plus participants. And so I'll continue to monitor, but Eric and Lily, if you're all right, I would love to begin.
Sure.
Ready when you are.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you all very much for joining us today for this incredibly timely and necessary seminar. And I want to thank Lillian Sir, her colleague Zach Evangelista, and of course Eric Rodebois for really reaching out to us. We are so blessed to have such incredible members, so generous, resourceful, and great experts in their fields. And so reached out to us about a week ago and had an idea that brings us here today. So one, thank you. Two, very much appreciate the ability to put something together very quickly. And then third, to have such a nice response. I think what you're going to hear today is going to be very eye-opening, but very important for you. I love that it covers not only a number of very specific topics, but also covers what I think Lily was referring to before, which is sort of new things, uncharted waters, almost like potentially new case law, if you will. So I think that's going to be great. The program is going to be broken up into 4 parts, and you'll have presentations both by Lillian Sir and by Eric Rodebois, looking at employment law. Incredibly important considering some of the legislative actions that have come out over the last month related to employees. Then contracts, and I'm going to ask a question at the end about how many people paid their rent for April, because we want to get an idea of that. Status of the courts, and then financial assistance programs. We've done a few seminars and conversations already on the CARES Act, the PPP, the bridge loan, the SBA EIDL loan. We're all living in the world of acronyms, but we're becoming experts with regard to that. So that is going to be our overview. My remarks are mostly concluded at this point, but we do want to say again, thank you and welcome. We've got a couple of more activities at the rest of the week. And so if you're able to join us tomorrow morning for Good Morning Coral Gables, it's what you've always wanted. It's not until 10 a.m. in the morning. So it's a little bit of a brunch style instead of 7:30 in the morning. I know my staff is happy because we usually arrive on site at the Biltmore at 6:15 a.m. So it's a little more civilized. You're welcome to wear your daytime pajamas. And we're going to hear from 2 experts that UHealth has procured for us, really on the public health and epidemiology side. So I think for many of you who have questions about antivirals, things about community health, how they're preparing for the surge, if you will, for Florida. It'll be good and timely. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A, and try to make it as Good Morning Coral Gables-ish as possible. Sarah Artacona is going to be our MC tomorrow, so that's always a good time. And then Friday, we're trying something a little bit different. One of our members is going to take us through a sort of mindfulness session, about 90 minutes, 3 o'clock on Friday. Missy Caricarte from Simple Results, and really a nice ability to check in with the overarching opportunity to kind of hit the reset button. Good plan going into the weekend. I know the weekends can be tough, especially for folks who are feeling a bit isolated and disconnected. So plenty of opportunities for both of those. And hopefully you're getting ready for our book club that Sarah Hernandez is going to work on with us. My book arrived from Books and Books yesterday, which they're doing free delivery with a purchase. And it's called The Pumpkin Plan. And we'll be talking about that on May the 1st. So those are my ministerial comments, but my most important thing is that we're so glad to see so many of you. You look fantastic. Thank you for engaging with us on the number of webinars and seminars we've done. Candidly, you know, chambers aren't in the business of social distance, so we're trying to create as much social engagement as possible. And with my tip of the cap to Lillian and Eric, who are also both board members of our chamber, for their leadership, expertise, and willingness to work with us. So with that, I'm going to let you see them. This is Eric's headshot from 15 years ago. And Lily is right here. And I think we're going to start with you. Is that correct, Eric?
Yes, we are. Hi, everyone. Eric Rodebois, welcome. And hopefully, you know, overall, we're talking about some very serious things. It goes without saying, it's not hyperbole. We're living in unprecedented times. And so Lillian and I, we both practice similar area of law. She can tell you about it, but we work with a lot of business owners. And business owners normally, you know, 3 months ago, they're coming to me asking me to draft contracts. They're talking about hiring people and employment law. They're asking me questions about non-compete agreements. And now we're getting a lot of the opposite questions. How do I get out of this contract? Can I get out of this contract? What about my employees? So Mark alluded to it. Things are changing. This is, a lot of this is cutting edge. Some of the laws have been written, but the actual regulations haven't. So we don't even have guidance on some of the things that's going on, or the guidance is coming out day by day. So Mr. Carlos Garrido, if we were doing this in a normal presentation, I would ask everybody to pull out their business card, and I'd ask you to write MRSQ on the back. Obviously, this is more virtual. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have a moderator who's going to be letting us know and if we can't answer anything today, we will offline. I know that Lily and I and Zach will all be reaching out to you. So just look at us as a resource of the chamber. So let's talk about employment law. First, and Mark, how do you want me to do this? Do I tell you to advance the slide? All right. So first of all, here's kind of the normal status of employment law in Florida. And when I mean normal, let's say like pre-coronavirus. So Florida is what we call an at-will state. In my whole career, I might have seen just a full of contracts where anybody is actually promised employment for a certain amount of time. And the reality is that most people, even if they have a written contract, it says that they can quit whenever they want and they can be fired whenever they happen to, their services are no longer needed, with or without cause. And the general rule of thumb is unless there's some discriminatory intent or purpose from the employer. So I can fire someone for anything that's not a discriminatory reason. And we won't go too deep into it, but basically I can fire someone because they're lazy or because they don't show up to work. I can't fire someone because of their religion or their race or their national origin. And again, there's much better, longer seminars that we could do just on employment law. Most people actually don't have a written contract. I always recommend that people should, but a lot of times, and someone will say, I'll pay you $20 or I'll pay you $50,000 a year. And so there's an area of law looking at whether somebody is allowed to be paid hourly or salary. And what we're looking at there is what we call exempt or non-exempt workers. And then lastly, just kind of like as a pre-overview, we look at the Family Medical Leave Act. Now, what's really important to know is that the Family Medical Leave Act from 1993, it only kicks in when a company has more than 50 employees. So most of my clients don't have to worry about this. I don't have to worry about this as an employer. I don't think the chamber has to worry about this. But, once a company has more than 50 employees, then other laws kick in. So just as a general overview of employment law, I always say that it's the number of employees you have that determines which laws you need to follow. I found a great outline once online that showed you, like, when you have one employee, which is like just you have to follow these certain laws. And then when you get 2 and 5 and 15 and 50 is a magic number. Mark, would you go? Thank you, sir. All right, so now I'm getting the opposite phone calls. It's not, can I make my employees sign a non-compete? It's what happens if I lay off my employees? And so actually a call I'm getting a lot is, I just got laid off. Am I entitled to a severance? And my first, I say, well, no, Florida law does not entitle you to any sort of severance, normally speaking. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but the majority of employees are not. And then I say, did you have any sort of employment offer, employment agreement, employment handbook, policies and procedures manual, something from your job that might talk about a severance? And if so, let's go look at that. And then employers, like for example, in my firm, none of my employees have a severance written into their employment contract, but oftentimes we offer them one if we let them go, and it's for a tactical reason. Like, we want them to sign a release and a waiver settlement, so that in exchange for maybe 1 month's pay, they'll leave us alone and we'll never have to worry about them. Okay, so if you're an employee, now's the time to make sure you know where your employment contracts are, your offer, your handbooks. You have an absolute right to ask for it. You can ask for it anytime you want, if there's, from whoever's handling the HR. But now's the time to have it on hand. If you're an employer, also it's a good idea to know what you've already promised your people. And so we're also getting a lot of partial unemployment questions. a family member of mine, they just cut her salary by 25% across the board, across the company. And the question is, what recourse does she have? And in reality, there is a thing called partial unemployment. There's also normal unemployment for anybody who's let go in this crisis. And so just as a aside that goes over everything, you can't discriminate when you're deciding who to let go. So if you just somehow you fire all the women in your company or furlough or lay them off or cut their salary, but you don't do the same for the men, now we're going to have problems. And in fact, I'm sure that there's going to be, and this is in every area of law, so much litigation that's going to come out of this experience from companies handling things the wrong way, or people just being opportunistic when this kind of settles down. So let me, Mark, would you advance? So the big important thing that happened is it's right here, this FFCRA. All right, so the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This is a nice acronym. Mark referenced our acronyms. So this became effective on April 2020. And if anyone really wants to go look it up, it is 29 FR Part 826. And what's really important are two parts, Section C and Section E. And this really involves sick leave for employees. And if it looks like I'm reading off screen, I have my iPad here because some of this is pretty dense, but I think it's important that everyone has kind of an overview of it. So Section C is the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. And what it does is it expands that Family Medical Leave Act that I mentioned earlier, where you have to have more than 50 days. And so it expands it, and it applies to all companies with less than 500 employees, which obviously includes companies with less than 50 employees. Now, I'll skip to the end. There's an exception involved, but it allows up to 12 weeks of paid protected leave for eligible employees. This is important legalese, who need to stay home due to their children being home because the facility is closed because of COVID-19. And so remember, traditional FMLA is only with companies with more than 50 employees, and this is any company with less than 500. So the first 10 days off are paid leave or accrued vacation or sick days, and any additional time must be paid. So it's normally 2/3 of the normal wage with a maximum of $200 a day up to $10,000. That section, just a quick overview. Section E is the Sick Leave Act. Oops.
Eric?
Hold on, I think he might have lost his internet. Let me check. Here, come in here.
Is this link gonna be available? A client who's also a member
Come in here, it's fine.
asking.
Right on my computer. Can't really see 'cause it's tiny.
Yes, we are recording.
Sorry, can somebody unmute dear De Niro?
You're unmuted.
I'm going to steal her computer. Sorry about that, guys. This is the world we're living in. My Zoom died.
Welcome back, Eric.
So let me just pick up where I left off. So Section E is the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, and this is for employees who leave work because they're sick. And so these are the 5 qualifications. Either they're subject to a quarantine, federal, state, or local, which I think is most of us. A healthcare provider told them to self-quarantine. If they have symptoms and they're trying to go see a doctor or the hospital, they're caring for an individual who is quarantined, or they're caring for a son or daughter who was displaced due to the facility they go to, the school or the daycare being closed. And so this one, Section E, is up to $511 or $5,110 in total. That's for the sick and the quarantined. And if it's because of the children, then it's $200 a day and $10,000 in total. So another aside, once we all go back to work, employers are supposed to post a notice. You can download these online. And then what's really important and what most are probably curious about are the exceptions. So there are exceptions for small businesses with less than 50 employees. And the reasons are, and it's vaguely written, and there is guidance coming out almost daily. So if the leave would cause expenses to exceed revenue, like if you're the employer and you're allowing your employees not to come into work because of one of the things I mentioned. So if the leave would cause expenses to exceed revenue, or if it would cause a substantial risk to the financial health or operational capacity of the employer because of the specialized skills, knowledge, or responsibilities of that employee, if they can't find enough other workers, and by the way, this is limited to the childcare provision. And so if this happens and you're going to deny covering the employee, you have to write down detailed facts and circumstances, and you have to keep the records for up to 4 years. Now, you don't have to file this anywhere, but there's also, you can actually apply to the Department of Labor for a hardship exemption. Now, they're saying that the Department of the Treasury is going to extend a payroll tax credit to cover the wages paid to the employees pursuant to this act. And, you know, truthfully, they define telework. So here's the overall, if you're an employer. If you're an employer and somebody is asking you about this, you need to speak to a lawyer. If you're an employee, you either going to get it and your employer's going to cooperate, or you're not, and then you might want to talk to a lawyer. Big important point, layoffs are still allowed. So a company can just say, listen, we're not going to let anyone take the medical leave. We're going to lay people off. But you got to remember, you're going to bump up into the discrimination issues. People are going to accuse you of not treating everyone equally. And you have to be able to demonstrate that the employee would have been laid off even if he or she hadn't have requested the leave. So,
Eric, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we've had a couple questions, and I know you've used the word layoff a couple times. Can you clarify for everybody the difference between furlough and layoff?
So layoff is permanent, furlough is temporary. So layoff is, I'm sorry, you got, like, we're closing the restaurant. Furlough is, we can only offer everyone half pay or half work or less, or whatever. And then I'm using half just as an example, or less, until things get back to normal.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, I got into the zone, so I stopped reading the chat on the side. Okay, so if we could skip ahead. All right, I think I covered these. I did. Yep, $200 a day, $10,000. Remember, there are exceptions. And by the way, when we're done for all the participants, Lily and I in the chamber will share this presentation with anyone who wants it. Yep, and so these essentially, this is the tricky thing when you're not controlling the presentation. Yes. Thank you, Mark. And this is the key takeaways, just to reiterate. So this act applies to employers with less than 500 employees. So if you're working for a giant company with more than 500, this doesn't apply. We can still have layoffs. Record keeping is going to be important. And so the employers that qualify for reimbursement through refundable tax credits, and there's going to be guidance coming from the Department of the Treasury. I think there was some even this week. Thank you, sir.
Great. Eric, I'll direct you to the chat. There are a couple of detailed questions there. But while you're reviewing that, I'm going to invite Lillian Sir to continue with our program.
Thank you.
Lillian is the owner and founder of Sir and Associates. And as I mentioned before, like Eric, she is a member of the Chamber's board. Welcome, Lillian Sir.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to see all the faces on this Zoom. It's been a tough time for all of us. As a small business owner, I understand up front and close and personal how things are going, and I'm also myself and Zach and others in my shop are dealing with our clients and trying to find solutions and trying to get them to the other side of this. So it's been a rough time for all of us, but I know that we are going to get through to this. So as part of my presentation, Mark, if you can move up to slide 17, 18. We're going to talk about contracts, and contracts is really what everything is about right now. And I wanted to just go over what the basics of the contract is, so that to set us up for this conversation. And this takes all semester of your first year in law school to talk about a contract. But basically, it's an offer and an acceptance. That's an agreement. And then there's this legal term that's called consideration, which someone, each person on both sides of that contract have to offer something of value in exchange for something of value on the other side. So if you look at a contract that is for goods and services, for example, you are providing payment for those goods and services. In a lease, which is also a contract, you are providing rent in exchange for the use of a space or a building. Next, Mark. So pre-coronavirus, the bottom line is the contract rules. All the terms that you will need in order to make good on a contract, your obligations, your rights, your duties, and the other side, the other party's obligations, rights, and duties are all in the contract. There are clauses that cover goods and services, the premises to be provided if we're talking about a lease, the instances of default. When is a default? If you don't pay rent by the 5th day, the 3rd day, is there a cure period for that rent? Is there a cure period for the obligation? Let's say that you are building out space. You have to do that within a certain amount of time before rent kicks in. Let's say that it's a contract for goods and services. When are those goods and services due? What happens if you don't deliver on time? How long is the contract? What are the term? What's a term? What's the termination provisions? Can you get out of the contract for cause or no cause? What's a dispute resolution? Your notice requirements, jurisdiction. Did you sign a contract where if there's a dispute, you're going to have to go to the middle of Idaho to go to court? So all of these things are in your contract. So now post-coronavirus, Mark, the terms of the contract still rule. Nothing has changed in that regard. On the other hand, do they? Next. Everyone has been throwing around a term called force majeure. Everyone's talking about it. I don't think that this clause has been talked about so much ever before. And that is the clause that has to do with acts of God and allocates the risk for these types of events to both sides. And these are events that are beyond parties' control. The examples of this are hurricanes, earthquakes, wars, riots, and governmental actions. So the question right now is COVID-19 an act of God? Is it a natural disaster? Or is the closure of all business by government action, will that excuse performance? Is government action a taking under a contract? A taking, which is like eminent domain, is when the government comes in and takes land. And so you would then be excused, for example, in the lease, you would be excused from that. Is it condemnation? Is it a casualty? In examples of a hurricane or a fire, let's say, and your premises are 25% damaged, you typically will get a 25% rent abatement. If it's 100%, then perhaps you'll get full abatement for a certain amount of time until the landlord can fix the space. But no one has planned for a pandemic, and no one has planned for a full closure of all businesses. And this is why all of this, as Christina mentioned right before we got started, excuse me, this is all going to be for the courts, and this is all going to be case law in the future. But I do bet you that all leases from now on will have some language in regards to pandemics. Something to keep in mind with these force majeure clauses and leases is that typically in a commercial lease, rent is exempted out of a force majeure clause. So it can talk all about how you would be relieved and rent would be abated in the instance of a hurricane or whatever other disaster or act of God is actually in that lease, because it also has to be detailed. But most likely your lease is going to state that rent does not fall under that force majeure, which is one of the issues that is happening right now. Next slide, Mark. So the bottom line is here that the contracts still rule, the lease still rules, and we would have to review your lease in order to advise you of which way to go. Next slide, Mark, please. So what do you do? First, we review your lease, your contract. What are your options? What are the payment terms? What happens in delay? Is rent exempted if we're talking about a lease? What happens if you cannot, for example, if you are a manufacturer and you cannot get your goods from China in order to manufacture your good? We can claim a possibility as far as not being able to meet the duties of your contract. What are the notice requirements that you have to provide? Anyone who is not paying rent must put their landlord on notice. And I advise that you claim under force majeure that you cannot use your space. And then that's a whole nother argument, is the underlying, going back to consideration on a lease, the underlying assumption of that lease and that agreement is you're going to have a space to use. And for that space that you use, you will pay rent. Again, this has not been tested by the courts, but these are all the arguments that we're going to see coming through for those actions that on a breach of contract on a lease. What are the notice requirements? Make sure you use the notice requirements. Next slide, Mark. And really at what you need to be doing right now with your vendors, with your suppliers, with your landlords, with your tenants. Some of us do own property, and we have to understand what our tenants are going through. And it's very important. We are going to get through this. It might be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, but we're going to get through this. So my advice as a business owner and as an attorney is that we want to preserve the relationships that we have. We want to preserve the relationships with our landlords, with our tenants, with our suppliers, with our vendors. We have a client who does event planning. Well, there are no events being planned right now, but you know what? There are events for the future. And so you can be planning those events with these same people that had events, and you're holding on to deposits. Would you rather find that person in breach of contract and hold on to that deposit and burn that relationship because they're not going to come back? Or do you want to hold on to the deposit and perhaps reschedule the event for the future? How about extending a contract term by the same amount of downtime that you have? You can use that in negotiations with your landlord for a lease. If I can't pay you rent this month or next month, or if I'm paying just 50% of the rent, let's add that to the back end of the lease. For those that are applying for the PPP loan, and we will talk about that later on in this webinar, you should tell your landlord, I'm applying for this loan, and part of this loan is I'm going to be able to pay you and have that forgiven. So work with me so we can get both of us this money that we need. Next, Mark. Really, at the end of the day, I think be flexible, be creative. And also, I've been seeing a lot on social media and in print that people are pivoting. People are pivoting and finding other ways. A lot of entrepreneurs out there are finding different ways of making a living all of a sudden. I've heard of liquor manufacturers who are switching over and producing Purell and those kinds of things, or manufacturers of clothing who are able to use their people and their materials on hand to make masks. I'm not saying everything should be COVID related, but this might be an opportunity of finding ways to do things differently. I mean, just here having this webinar today, we're doing things differently. People were commenting that they have been on Zoom. This is their 5th Zoom meeting of the day. So we're all working differently, and I think that that's the key right now. It doesn't help you with the terms of those contracts, but I think that for both sides, be it landlord, be it tenant, be it supplier, be it the purchaser, everyone is in the same boat, and everyone is going to want to try to come out as whole as possible on the other side. So I think that you will find some flexibility. There are landlords, heck, my landlord, I asked for rent abatement of 50%, and she said no. I ended up sending her 50%. Let's see what happens. So you don't, I think that we are not closed off to all of these things, and we should be creative and open-minded. And I think that that is it. Next slide, I think, is back to Eric. Any questions for me to answer now, or are we waiting until the end?
Lillian, I had one that was CARES Act related, so I thought that maybe we would
wait
hold
till
off
later on that.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. It was very CARES related. And Eric, I know you had a chance to look at the chat.
No, I haven't. I barely got my computer working again.
Okay.
But listen, everyone with questions, we will get back to you, I promise. I wanted to interject with 2 quick things. So my cousin is a commercial real estate developer and owner. And I asked him, I said, are people paying their rent? He goes, well, listen, we're using this as an opportunity to get rid of bad tenants. Like if they stop paying their rent, we're evicting them. We're using this as an opportunity to renegotiate with good tenants because we would rather keep them in for 5-10 years rather than get in a fight with them over the next couple months. And then as a separate note, this is non-coronavirus related, but the point is really good. We had a client that was gonna terminate a contract, and what they did is they did what every normal person would do. They called their sales rep and they complained, and the sales rep said, we'll fix it. And they complained 3 more times and it never got fixed. And they just called the sales rep and said, hey, we're canceling. Well, what happened about a week later? They got a demand for arbitration. And I said to the client, I'm like, did you even read your contract? And he goes, no, I didn't. I'm like, well, it said in there that if you had a problem, you had to send a certified letter to this particular address. And that if you couldn't work it out, you had to go to arbitration. Doing the normal thing, which is calling your sales rep and just telling them you're unhappy, might not be the legal thing. So for all of you, make sure you read your contract. So I wanted to talk about the status of the courts, and really what gave Zach and I and Lily this idea, and I'll give a shout out to Madeline Peterson, my law clerk who's helping, is we were talking about real estate, and we're like, well, can we evict people anyways, right? Like if you pay your rent, is there access to the courts? And for those of you who are not in the legal world or have a family member in the legal world, the courts are turned upside down. I wanted to invite our next chairman, I think he's in attendance, Brian Barakat, who is a litigator and who is married to Michelle Barakat Alvarez, Judge Michelle, if he could chime in. Brian, are you here? I think, Mark, you're controlling it.
In terms of unmuting him, let me see.
Yep. Brian, I see you.
Hold on.
Hey, guys.
Oh, there you are.
Hi, everybody.
Hey,
great to see you and to be unmuted. I feel like a bird set free. Eric, thank you very much for taking the time to host this. Lillian, thank you for your words. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you guys an update on the courts. The courts have been doing their best, and they have a tremendous number of moving parts. And my wife and some of my other friends have been involved in the administrative meetings to bring the courts back up and running to the fullest extent that they can. And the courts are running right now. We have had a motion heard and resolved in every single week since we've been on quarantine. So for the past 5 weeks, we have had at least one hearing each week. We have conducted depositions, we have conducted mediations, we have settled cases, and my firm is set to go to trial on April 27th. And so the business of the courts is pressing on, albeit slowly. There are some things that are definitely not happening. Number one, there are no evictions right now. And so a number of people, both landlords and tenants, have called us all about this issue. You cannot be kicked out of your place, commercial or residential, at this moment. It doesn't mean the landlord can't declare a default. It doesn't mean they can't sue for their rent. And it doesn't mean they can't wait until after the pandemic is over and then seek to evict. But right now, nobody's getting evicted. So that's important. Second, there are no jury trials. And so if there's a case that's set for jury trial and one side or the other insists, that case simply will not go forward. There is a tolling of any deadline that would have fallen between March 16th and June 1st is now June 1st. And so a little bit of extension on the statute of limitations, a little bit of extension on a discovery request, a little bit of an extension on an appellate deadline. So those are all done. But if your deadline was June 1st or it was June 2nd, then it's still June 1st or June 2nd. And the courts are able to shorten that up and give you deadlines within them. So that's my update on the courts. I'm available anytime if anybody has a question. And thanks for inviting me up to speak, Eric.
Thank you, Brian. So for most of you probably know, but Brian is the owner of Bearcat Law, and he will be our next chairman when the next term starts, God willing. And I just wanted to ask you one last question, Brian. Is there any difference between federal and state right now for how they're handling things?
There are different administrative orders by both sets of courts. And I have the federal orders, although I did some crib notes for the state court orders, figuring that's what you'd be interested in. But I'd be happy if you give me an hour to pull together the corresponding orders in the federal courts.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot. And I know you started as a prosecutor.
That's okay.
Are the criminal courts still functioning? Like if I get arrested tomorrow?
The criminal courts are in worse shape than the state courts than the civil courts, because there's so many pro se litigants who are somewhat less access to technology. The Supreme Court of Florida has suspended the speedy trial rule. Of course, there are no jury trials. And so there is a tremendous, I shouldn't say tremendous, there is a comparatively more difficulty moving a criminal case forward right now. They are conducting hearings. They are doing their level-headed best to make sure that essential hearings, like bond hearings, are going forward. But it is a little more difficult to move a criminal case forward right now.
And just to let your last question. So your wife is conducting business of the courts?
Michelle is in the courthouse right now conducting Zoom hearings with the litigants. So it's just her and about 8 feet away a clerk, but everybody else is appearing by Zoom.
I just saw someone added to the chat that DLE Legal Services has the technology to help. I've actually heard of a lot of court reporting companies teaching webinars on how to do depositions, mediations, wearing people in over Zoom. Unrelated, but kind of related, we're doing online notarizations now. I think a lot of clever changes are going to come out of this. You know, I guess we're going to call it the new normal. And I've even heard of mediations with breakout rooms. Zoom has a breakout room feature, which Will Dukes did in his presentation a week ago, where you can put different people in different rooms where I guess that's how you would be confidential, where the mediator can go from room to room. Okay, so I've also heard that the courts are still issuing summons. Our experience is it's taken about 2 weeks. Just so you know, a summons is what starts everything. So if you've ever had a process server, and I've also heard process servers are still doing their job. So a process server is the guy that like hides in the bushes and hands you the piece of paper and says, you've been served, like on TV. And so they're still doing their jobs. They're wearing masks and gloves. and the courts are still issuing summons. So a summons is what we use to start a civil proceeding. So when somebody breaches the contract that Lily was talking about, then they hire Brian to sue. The courts are I guess, still processing that. So I guess the moral is you can stop paying your rent, but your landlord can still sue you for being in default. It's just they can't actually do the eviction now. And I have a bullet point here. What's an ongoing case? Realistically, and I think Brian, you could chime in on this. The litigators are still busy, right? You guys are home pushing your cases forward, and probably more than ever before. Oh, he's talking. Sorry, I put him on the spot while he's muted. Mark, would you go to the next slide? All right, as Brian said, all the deadlines have been pushed back. I believe the federal is pushed back to July 1st and the state is pushed back to June 1st. And that's where we mentioned different courts. So just so you know, a lot of different courts. There's the bankruptcy court, the criminal court, the probate court, the family court, the civil court. And so what we found in our experience is it's going to be case by case, judge by judge. Some judges were quicker to adapt to the new normal than others. Some were more reluctant. And so I think each judge will be issuing their own procedures. So you'll, for those of you in the business, you'll be checking case by case. Thank you, Mark. All right. And so Lily touched on what if you can't pay your rent. The biggest key would be to have direct communication with your landlord. You'd want to prevent them from going out and filing a lawsuit against you for an eviction. Until further notice, though, the sheriffs are not doing any evictions. And so remember, this is a key takeaway. Read your lease. I would be really surprised if there was a force majeure clause in your lease, but maybe there is. Actually, I think I have one in my master lease, but I didn't have any in my sublease. And I think that's it. I think it's back to Lily.
Thank you, Eric. Let's talk about some financial assistance, which is really what is top of mind for many of us. Mark, can you go to the next slide? The first loan that is available out there is called the Florida Small Business Bridge Loan, and this is through the state of Florida. This is a short-term interest-free loan to small businesses that have experienced a hardship due to this current crisis. You have to have between 2 and 100 employees, and the terms are up to $50,000. It's interest-free for 1 year and then goes to 12% on the unpaid balance. That's the interest rate that has been set for a long time now. Now, I would not be surprised if the repayment period is extended and or that interest rate drops substantially. The application deadline for this loan is May 8th, 2020, and the link to apply is right here on the screen, which is floridadisasterloan.org. The basic intent of this loan is to provide a bridge to other loan alternatives. Next, Mark. The EIDL loan, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, this has been around for quite some time. And this is an SBA loan. So you apply directly to the SBA for this loan. It is available to businesses that have 500 or fewer employees. It's also available to sole proprietors, independent contractors, and private not-for-profits. You have to be a U.S. citizen and you have to be a permanent resident. The loan amount for this loan is that it's up to $2 million. And that there are cash advances up to $10,000 within 3 days. However, I personally have applied for this loan. I got an email yesterday that it's in process and that there has been additional SBA guidance issued on the $10,000 advance. that it is not the full $10,000. That is dependent on the number of employees that you have. So if you have 3 employees, then you can get up to $3,000. If you have 5, then 5, and moving up to $10,000. I think it was a perception of everyone that it would be an automatic disbursement, but that's not the case. The terms here are 3.75 interest and 2.75 for not-for-profits, and you have up to 30 years to repay. The process typically for these idle loans are that the SBA conducts a credit review, so they do pull your credit, and they will confirm the extent of the loss. An SBA officer supposedly will determine your eligibility. Now, this is all based on previous use of the disaster loan. It's unclear right now with COVID and the number of applications, how quickly these are going to be processed. I was able to get through to the SBA personally late last week, and they just said because of the number of loans that they're processing, it's taking a lot longer than usual. Next slide, Mark. This is where you go to apply. It's a very simple application. The only things, pieces of information that you do have to know in advance is your tax ID, your gross revenues for the previous 12 months, and cost of goods sold. If you don't know what cost of goods sold is, it's payroll, materials, anything that you actually need to spend money on in order to generate your revenues. And then your bank information. Those are the, other than that, it's a 2-pager. It's pretty simple. The filing deadline for this is 12/31 of 20, and these are the additional documentations that may be required in the future. Mark, next. The PPP loan is, as you know, or may know, it was approved through the CARES Act a couple of weeks ago, passed by Congress. It's available for businesses with 500 or fewer employees, also available to sole proprietors, independent contractors, and for private not-for-profits. You have to have been in business as of February 15th, 2020, and have employees to whom you paid salaries to. Again, you have to be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. The difference here is that this loan is going to be processed or is being processed through private lenders. All major lenders were already pre-approved preferred lenders for the SBA. And then I believe that additional lenders have been added to that list, smaller banks. Each lender has their own application, but basically they are using the information that's being required by the SBA. The loan amount is up to $10 million or 2.5% of your average monthly total payroll costs. Now, payroll includes all of these things: payroll, rent, mortgage interest if you own your own building, and utility payments. The payments are deferred for 6 months and possibly for a year. Currently, the repayment is a 2-year repayment period, but I have a feeling that's going to be extended. Next, Mark. Now, the loan forgiveness is what everyone is so excited about in this loan, in that it will allow up to, or loan forgiveness of up to 8 weeks of all your payroll costs, your mortgage, interest, and rent. So if you use the funds that you get from the loan for these reasons and you can document it, then that portion of the loan will be forgiven. The SBA will then pay the lender for that amount plus interest. Here's a list of the the typical requirements. I haven't processed one personally, but I have looked at the requirements for Chase, which is my bank, and First Citizens, which is another bank that my husband and I bank with. And these are the typical requirements for that loan. Next, Mark. You'll also need to have information in regards to group health care coverage that you're providing. This is all part of your payroll, insurance premium. This is for the forgiveness part. You'll need to show this documentation. You'll also have to show the taxes, the state and local taxes that you paid, and you'll have to have a copy of your driver's license for all owners 20% or greater in the company. The filing deadline here is June 30th. I really advise you to get on it as quickly as possible. There are rumors that they're only going to do this until the money's run out and or until Congress expands the program, which may happen as well. In addition to these, there are other options out there. Next, Mark. Facebook has put out a promise to provide up to $100 million in grants to 30,000 businesses around the world. You can go onto the site listed there. There's a link at the bottom and sign up. I signed up but have not received any information as yet. The eligibility requirements are here. You have to be a for-profit company. You have to have between 2 and 50 employees, been in business for over a year, and have experienced, you've been affected by the COVID-19. And you have to be in or near a location near where Facebook operates, and Miami-Dade qualifies for that. It's on the list. I mean, really, I don't know where Facebook would not operate. Next, Mark. As far as taxes are concerned, there is the payroll tax that's been deferred. Payroll may be, the taxes for your payroll may be deferred through 12/31 of 20, and you can pay these taxes all the way through December of 2022. This is not available to PPP loan recipients, so you need to evaluate this option. This is also available for self-employed taxpayers, and you can defer up to 50% on Social Security tax. The employee retention credit is available to employers who receive refundable credits of up to 50% of employee wages between March 12th and January 1st of 21, if you have to partially or fully suspend operations because of COVID. Interest expenses, you can also deduct 50% of interest expenses for 2019 and 2020 up to 30%. These are all things that you should talk to your CPA about. They're going to be able to assist you with these things. Next, Mark. Brian spoke a little bit about foreclosure and evictions. They are suspended, as he stated. But also, it is very important to note that if you've been affected by COVID, which the majority of us have, you can contact your lender and ask for a deferment of your mortgage. If your mortgage is guaranteed by the FHA, Fannie Mae, or Freddie Mac, which most of our loans are, and all the major lenders that I know of are already working with their mortgage borrowers in order to defer payments up to 90 days. And what they're doing is you have the option of paying your mortgage then at the end of those 90 days, or you can modify your mortgage and they add it to the back of the mortgage. This was used as an option during our last major hurricane, I think it was Irma, where banks were doing this as well. And they're also providing this for commercial properties. So if you are holding any commercial properties, you may want to speak with your lender about deferring your monthly mortgage. Owners of multifamily properties with these GSE-backed loans also are available for payment extensions up to 90 days. And again, foreclosures on single-family homes with these types of loans are prohibited, effective 3/18, and that goes through 60 days. Next. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, where we need to stay flexible and we need to stay cognizant of opportunities coming our way and get ready to pivot in order to help yourself make it through this time. You may want to consider government contracts and or getting minorities certified because if not if, the government is actually stepping up, according to our president, stepping up the infrastructure, monies for infrastructure projects, and there are going to be a lot of bids out there available. This is going to help architects, engineers, contractors, and everyone that supplies the construction industry. Also, as always, services and goods through government agency is really a great opportunity to add to your revenues. And for those of you, which probably all of you on this call, can be certified as a small business enterprise and or a minority business that would allow you to also participate. And please keep in mind, this is not just for government. Most major private companies, I mean, I'm talking Walmart's, Target, all these huge companies also have a minority spend. So look into it. This might be a great opportunity. You might have a little bit more time on your hands right now to look into what bids they have out there and maybe give that a shot. So just an opportunity. And that's it for me, Mark.
Fantastic. So,
Oh, Mark, you're muted.
sorry about that. We have a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'm actually going to make that very large. I don't know if you can see that. But a number of questions related to the PPP being obviously through a banking relationship, whereas the Florida Bridge and EIDL are not. And then some comments specifically about the fact that it seems like the bridge loan has officially run out of money, and that the SBA EIDL loan has some caps on it now. So would either of you like to comment about that?
I've not seen that. If anyone has that information, just send it on to me. That would be great. But just yesterday, I received an email as an applicant that my application is in process. Whether that comes through or not, I'm not quite sure.
Which,
Christina Miller.
Which one is that, Lily?
That was for the EIDL.
For the
disaster loan. I didn't apply for the bridge loan.
Christina's put a few comments in the chat as well, and if she wants to open her mic, she and I also spoke last evening to try to get some clarification.
One thing that I see there, somebody asks about 1099s. So there was a lot of confusion about this. When they first discussed the program, this is the PPP, they were saying that a company could include their 1099 independent contractors. If we did a proper employment law seminar, we could talk about the difference between W-2, 1099. But quickly afterwards, they changed it and they said that actually the 1099s would not be included in the PPP. Because if you think about it, each 1099 independent contractor is supposed to be running their own business. So then they would have to apply on their own behalf, not the companies that they work for would apply for them.
Right, but Eric, in the case where you have a 1099 salesperson on a draw, they still have to apply, even though you have a contract with them and they're on a draw. Does that still apply? Because you have a contract with them and you're obligated to pay them that draw.
As far as I understand, in the calculation of your payroll costs, you can include your 1099s. What you can't include is salaries above $100,000. And in the CARES Act and the Act itself, it includes independent contractors.
So our PPP application didn't even ask us for recent payroll records. It asked us for last year's 2019 payroll returns. So the W-3, which we had to submit, only references payroll employees. It does not reference any independent contractor on 1099. So they are not using that for consideration in the calculation. But yet, as a company, what do you do if you have a legal contract with that salesperson and you're obligated to pay them a draw?
I don't have an answer for you, but I can certainly look into it and call a banker that's working on these. Because as far as I understand, you are allowed to submit it, to include it.
And I saw a question here about furloughed versus layoff. The answer is both can file for unemployment. If it's, and Florida has been encouraging people to apply. This is, remember, this is through the state of Florida unemployment program.
A question I saw, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lily.
Christina, you mentioned here that some banks are not offering PPP. That is correct. You have to be a certified lender or a preferred lender through the SBA. Many of the large banks are only servicing existing clients, but I believe that there are some banks that have opened up. I've seen some emails flying through. I think one of which might be Marquee Bank that is taking new customers.
So I also know that. So I also know that there's some online lenders, like we bank at Apollo Bank. So Apollo Bank is not offering the PPP loans.
Right.
So they referred us to Cabbage, and I also know that Quicken Loans is also offering. They seem to be working a little bit faster than the banks, just because they were already set up as online as online lenders. So that may also be an option, because I've spoken to other banks that are not my bank, and they're telling me, which is reasonable, that if we want to apply with them, the first process is that you have to open an account with them. And that entails, especially when you have multiple partners, that entails a process within itself. So for those people who have those type of complications, maybe going through an online lender is just the fastest route to go.
And some of those, Christina, have closed off to new clients as well because they've reached capacity. A question that came up earlier, maybe Lillian, for you, it says, my accountant informed me that every employer is required by the CARES Act to pay all employees 2 weeks pay, even though our office is mandated to be closed by the state of Florida. It's a dental office. And we haven't been open or working at all. I couldn't find it anywhere in the information. Could you clarify?
You want me to take that?
I didn't know if you wanted to talk about, or either of you, it's just because it's CARES Act related.
My understanding is that if you have an employee who has been affected by COVID, is in quarantine, or is at home taking care of a child because schools are closed, that you are required to pay up to 14 days. Now, for businesses that have 50 or fewer employees, there is an option that you can claim, well, if I pay this, it's going to cause me financial hardship. So for the really small companies, you can get around it that way. But for anything over 50 employees, it's my understanding that you do have to pay.
More of a question about your practices was asked of both Lily and Eric. Do you have any special fees and packages to help businesses right now?
We do, Mark. About a month ago, when I saw what was happening, we put, we dropped our prices. We are providing a 25% discount to all new and existing clients through May 31st. We, of course, never charge a consultation fee. We are talking to people every day, and if we can help them quickly, we don't charge them at all. And then if we have to take them on and actually, do some extensive work, then of course we do. But we are trying to assist all of our clients as much as we can. We are also, through our Trust and Estates of Counsel, Rachel Tolley, we are providing packages to clients. We've not advertised this yet. But we put together a basic package for $495 that will include a will, a living will, the power of attorney, which will include your health surrogate and everything that you might need if you get into that situation or if your loved one does. So we're trying to assist. That was created to help those people like nurses and teachers and firefighters and everyone that really, don't have a lot of assets, but also need the protection. So those are the things that we're doing. Plus, we are providing on a weekly basis updates on legislation. We started that also almost 4 weeks ago. We're putting one out later this week on everything that the state of Florida is doing, since we've been concentrating on just the federal side. That's it.
What about you? Thank you.
I would say this, we have also stopped charging, so we normally charge consultation fees. We've stopped that as of, I got back from my vacation, it was March 15th. I was having a wonderful vacation in Mexico when the world fell apart. So no consultation fees. And I'll tell you what we've gotten a lot more flexible with is payment plans, where normally we wouldn't start working on a project until we had the payment in full. Now we're working, I think yesterday we signed up somebody on a 6-month, essentially it's layaway legal services. I just made that up right now. That's not really what it is. But, we are in interesting times for sure, Mark.
Question came up, as a small business that counts on every dollar to survive, we will have to know what we must be able to offer for our employees to be compliant, such as masks, face shields, etc. Who would be responsible to pay for these items, the business or the employee? I assume that's when things start to reopen or in the essential business category.
Eric, do you want to take that?
I actually don't know. I don't know the answer.
Well, I think that as an employer, we are responsible for providing a safe environment. So I think that it has to do with the type of office that you're in. For essential services that remain open, currently the state is requiring, or not the state, the I can't think of the name right now. The medical people are requiring that everyone wear masks wherever you go. So I think that, although I don't know from a legal perspective if it's required, but I would think that if the employee doesn't have their own masks, that the employer should provide it, if at all possible. And also for social distancing within the office, allowing people to take turns coming to the office so you're not overcrowded. I think those are all reasonable measures that employers should be taking right now.
I'll say this, Mark. I have a connection to a pharmacist on Miami Beach. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to share it offline. And he's been delivering face masks, hand sanitizer, and gloves. And so I have a stockpile. We're running a skeleton crew at the office. It's 2 people in 6,000 square feet, so I'm sure that they're socially distanced. But we wanted them to feel comfortable. And there are still a certain number of times where we have to meet people in the office, so we're providing them with gloves and masks. And I don't know about the obligation. I'm sure Lily is right, but just morally, I'm not going to ask anyone to come to the office who doesn't feel comfortable without giving them the tools they need.
Okay. We talked a little bit about tenants and the fact that there are no evictions at the moment, but any recommendations on how to deal with a tenant who stopped paying rent?
Do you want them out or do you want to keep them? That was my cousin's perspective.
Now, as far as a hold on evictions, I'm not necessarily sure that that applies to commercial property. It does apply to residential.
This appears to be residential, a residential question, Lily. This appears to be residential related.
Yes, there are no evictions happening right now. And I think that you should work with the person, because in a few months, everything is going to be back to normal. Did this person lose their job, or are they just not paying? I mean, I think there's a difference there. But still, you're not going to be able to go through the courts to evict.
So a lot of comments and thank yous to bankers, like thanks to Frank Fernandez, thanks to City National. Here's an interesting observation. It says, the CEO of the Cheesecake Factory. Oh, I lost it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that was national news.
Yeah, it made national news that they were not going to necessarily pay employees, but instead, they also said they weren't going to pay rent. So I apologize.
Yes, they were the leader.
I lost the question in the chat.
They were the leader of the pack of Cheesecake. So they wrote a letter to all of the mall operators. This was back in probably mid-March, that they were not going to be paying April rent. And the ICSC, which is the International Society of Shopping Centers or whatever, they wrote a letter to Trump and are trying to push legislation to assist the whole retail market and shopping centers, because all shopping centers are closed. We represent a a client that has stores around the country, only in malls, and they are completely shut down. And we've put all the landlords on notice, and the landlord sent us back their notice that rent is still due. So this is really going to play out, and it's going to be played out by the major players. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on this and whether some legislation comes out very soon on this, because they're going to need a bailout for sure.
Yeah, and just back to the Cheesecake Factory comment, it says that they've upped the ante and that they believe they're eligible for about $5 million in PPP, and that they're not going to use that for employees either. So it's definitely
Well, you don't have to. You don't have to use it.
Yeah.
For your employees.
Can a
It's just
business
if you
owner
want the loan forgiven?
Correct, 100%, right. Can a business owner apply for unemployment if they are not currently taking a salary?
Eric?
I don't actually know. So they're self-employed. And just most of you know, anyone who owns an LLC, it is considered self-employed as well.
I believe that you are allowed to file for unemployment.
Yeah, I agree.
Again, just lots of thank yous as well. So I think we're at that point. If an employee is eligible for emergency FLMA, the FFCRA states that the employee can receive compensation up to $200 a day. If that employee typically earns more than $200, and the employer chooses to pay them their full compensation, is there any penalty or fault in that?
So the answer is the cap is the cap, and it's trying to strike a balance between the employee and the employer. So, you know, this is one of those things where everything's so new. But yeah, I understand that maybe the employee makes a lot more than that, and this is where I guess Congress was trying to strike a balance.
Okay. Again, let's see. A lot of thank yous. Thank you to Dobry at City National. Call Bank OZK. They are helpful. Here's one says, and then I think Carlos Garrido put in some links.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Carolina. Madeline Peterson said, Christina, to answer your earlier question about special fees. Oh, I think you answered that, Eric, as well. We talked about sole proprietors and self-employed. Here's a question. It says, my Paycheck Protection Program application asked for the 2019 payroll.
Yeah, we actually, so when we were preparing our application, you know, this is when your relationship with your accountant, your bookkeeper, and your payroll company and your banker really is important. You know, we take all these things for granted, and I think there's a lot of people out there, I won't name names, but I know someone who has all their business Bank of America. They just, for whatever reason, don't have a Bank of America credit card. And Bank of America was telling them that they weren't eligible for the PPP because they didn't have both a banking and a lending pre-existing banking and lending relationship. So I doubt anyone from Bank of America is in the room. So heard bad things. I like community banks.
Question, it says, I've heard the PPP is not applicable to companies that are using PEO, such as a employee leasing company. Is that true?
No.
Okay. My accountant told me that you can't include 1099s. You tell them to directly apply for PPP themselves. I have heard that as a yes, and that opened up last Friday, April 10th. Facebook grant applications will be available next week, Wednesday the 22nd. Staples has done the same thing as Cheesecake Factory. This is supposed to end now. Thank you, Deirdre. We will make the content available, both the slides without the weird little box, apologies for that, as well as the recording as well. Some not happy people about certain other banks. We won't mention them by name. some of them are members.
And I saw an interesting question from Ephraim. Hi, Mr. Sora, asking whether employment litigation is coming. I think all the litigation is coming. There's going to be real estate. There's going to be, like Lily mentioned, the force majeure clause. Employment litigation. People are going to get furloughed, and they're going to accuse it in all different angles. They're going to say they were discriminated against. So I think that the litigators out there are probably excited.
Fantastic. So any parting thoughts, Lillian, Eric? We're coming right up at 5:30, so we've been on about 75, 80 minutes.
I just want to reiterate, I think we need to be flexible. I think that we need to be creative in our approach to contracts and our relationships. And I think that we need to continue to think outside the box for how we're providing services, how we are dealing with our clients and our customers. I mean, Steve over at Clutch always, he never seems to cease to amaze me on, the things that he comes up with. And I saw today that he's willing to cook the food and drive it to you himself. These are desperate times, desperate measures, and I think we have to continue to support our small businesses. If you're hungry, call Steve or call, one of the other restaurants on Giralda or in the Gables. Let's keep the money that we are spending here in the Gables if we can, or in Dade County if we can.
That's an excellent point, and I would say between Steve Bradley and Nick Sharp over at Threefold, two very creative forces in this moment, but also incredibly generous as well, and trying to be as accessible and creative as possible. Eric, any parting comments?
Also, while we're up giving shout outs, I know that Welcome Gentlemen in special circumstances can come to your house and give you a shave. I don't know if do it in the yard, or I don't know if maybe I wasn't supposed to say that. Rick, maybe I'm mistaken.
Listen, I'm about to break out the Flowbee.
Yeah, I had Deirdre shaving my head in the backyard last week. So speaking of desperate times, I want to give a shout out, Mark, to your staff. All of them have been great helping us put this together. And I know we couldn't do it without you and them. And I can't stress how much how great it is that you guys gave us this opportunity. And I'll see you guys tomorrow morning to hopefully feel a little more normal.
So that's a great segue. And again, great applause. We ended up with right at 50 people that participated inside of the peak of the program. So again, I think it's not only content program and our great presenters, but the opportunity to fellowship even at a distance is incredibly resourceful. But tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., please join us for Good Morning Coral Gables brunch style. You can wear your daytime pajamas. We don't even care if you're drinking mimosas and day drinking during it. We're super open-minded to that. So if you want to be rosé all day, we're with you. And we'll hear from two outstanding U-Health professionals, Dr. Olvin Carrasquillo, Master in Public Health, MD, talking to us specifically about, what's happening in Florida, Miami-Dade, from a public health perspective, and bringing us hopefully a bunch of news in terms of antiviral and what's on the horizon there, research-wise. And then Brenda Rodriguez, community health leader, will be partnered with him. And we'll have a time for some Q&A. And we're going to do our best to do the Will Dukes model and try a breakout session with the ambassador. So fingers crossed, we're learning as we go too. And then Friday, Missy Carricart, 3 o'clock. Love to have you talking about reset button, and it's okay to not be okay. So check out our podcast. We're doing that every other week now instead of once a month. And call us if you've got an idea. Email us. Help me clean my office from 6 feet away. We'll make the recording on our YouTube. Thanks, everybody. This will be up on our YouTube.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Mark, that was great.
Thank you. Great job, you guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Contact.
Bye.
Oh, hello, Monique. There's a big bird behind you.
That's Simon.
I've been dying to ask about the bird.